So a few disclaimers before I get into the message today. One, a more personal nature. I want you to know that at different points in my own life, I have been suicidal. I suffered through what I think would have been diagnosed as a clinical depression. Now, looking back on it, I never saw it help. I didn't really know to need to, but looking back on it, it's clear as day because I stayed high daily for about 2 years, and now I can see that I was self-medicating. And I also did some self-harm. So all that to say, I'm going to try to wade into some kind of an emotional minefield this morning. And I just want you to know that for me, these topics are, they're more than theoretical, they're personal. The other disclaimer I want to make is I'm going to try to explain something that is hard to explain, and I'm not 100% that I can pull it off. I'm going to try to explain the thing that is better than happiness, the thing that makes life worth living, the thing that will get you out of bed in the morning and help you put one foot in front of the other when you don't really have any reason to do it. And I'm not sure if I can pull it off. So I'd like to pray before we get into the scripture for God's help. Lord, I hope that I can explain this well. I would really like to impart some courage and a sense of purpose. Please help. Amen. All right. Let's look at this passage. This is 1 Kings chapter 19. Now, Ahab, this rotten king, told Jezebel, who was a real piece of work herself, everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely." And she's saying, I promise you, I put this on my mother. This will happen. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. Now, I doubt most of us can imagine what that feels like. I don't know if you've ever had a unexplainable, random negative reaction with a stranger where you got sort of like were spoken to rudely or maybe even cursed out by somebody for no reason. I live in New York City, so it happens to me on the semi-regular. And whenever it happens, whenever you go through one of those negative interactions, it might take me 2 or 3 days emotionally to get back on the table. You know, first you go through all the, I should have said this, or what's wrong with that person, and then you make your peace with it, or whatever. So imagine what you would have to do to recover from a death threat, even a random death threat from a stranger that didn't mean it. Just you listen to your voicemail, and someone's like, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill your kids. And like that would take you a while you might call the police. Well, imagine a credible death threat from somebody that's got the resources and the will to actually pull it off. Very difficult emotionally to deal with. And so Elijah does what I think any single one of us would do. He was afraid, verse 3, and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. So he goes off totally by himself. He leaves his servant behind. He's all alone out in the wilderness, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He walks for a whole day out to the middle of nowhere. And he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. He lay down under the bush, and he fell asleep. So he's, the best way in modern terminology to describe this is he's suicidal. He's praying for death. He doesn't want to live anymore. He's having kind of a existential crisis of, I thought that I was the man of God. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I'm no better than my ancestors. I'm just like everybody else. And he has gone off totally by himself. He's isolated himself, and then he has gone to sleep and shut out the world, which is something I've experienced, where you just pull the blinds and sleep all day long, and it's just like I just want to shut this all out. I just want to pretend like it's not there. And sometimes that's the best that you can manage in life. So Elijah, he's in a bad way. He is in a bad way. And he is in a bad way because he's been following the Lord. he's got problems because he did what God asked him to do. And that's a really important thing that I want to point out to you. You know, when life hits you in the stomach, when you're sad, when you're really low, even when you're in the depths of sorrow to the point where you wonder whether it's all worth it. When life hits you a curveball, it's not a bad idea to ask yourself, is there something that I need to learn from this? Is this something that I've done? Because I've certainly done my fair share of boneheaded things and suffered the consequences for it. But a lot of times, it's not that. And if anything, I think we have the tendency to really beat ourselves up. We have a tendency to kick ourselves while we're down. When things don't go my way, I'm so quick to say, you idiot, what are you doing? Or to question God, are you here? Are you answering me? Are you punishing me for something? When my wife and I, before we had our first son, we went through 4 miscarriages. We got pregnant 4 times, got excited 4 times, and lost the baby 4 times. And it's a phase of life I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And at some point in the midst of all that despair, I was reading the Bible, and a verse kind of rose up like a life preserver out of this ocean of grief, and I just clung to it. And it was Jesus' birth story. It was actually about John the Baptist's birth story and his parents. And the scripture said that his parents were righteous, yet they were childless. And I just clung to that. They were righteous, but childless. And then it made me think about this other time where Jesus' disciples brought this blind man to him, and they said, who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it his sin, or was it his parents' sin? And Jesus said, it's not sin. This man was not blind because of sin. It's so that God's glory can be displayed. But I think we have that tendency to blame ourselves, to look for an explanation, and man, we can be harsh with ourselves. We treat ourselves the way we would never treat anybody else. I mean, we will kick ourselves when we're down. I will kick myself when I'm down. But sometimes things just happen. I don't want to say they're random, because I'm not sure that random things happen. It's not quite the right word, but I will say that there is a sort of arbitrary nature to reality, where sometimes you just get cut off at the knees for reasons that are at the least unexplainable. At least that's what God says. At the end of the book of Job, after Job goes through all this horrible suffering and he loses all his children and everything, God says to him, you're not big enough to understand this. I can't explain why to you because you're just not big enough. It would be like trying to explain calculus to a 6-month-old. They're just not there yet. I don't know whether God will ever grow us to the point where we can understand it, but we're not there yet. He said some things happen and you're not big enough to get it. And that's certainly a reality. And then to make things worse, sometimes we suffer, we go through hard times for doing the right thing. Sometimes it's because you took a stand that people are being harsh towards you. Sometimes it's because you made a change in your life that you lose some friends. It's possible that decisions that were made last night, some of you will face some consequences to those decisions. And there's going to be the temptation to think, whoa, I thought everything was going to be good if I made this change. Sometimes we suffer for doing the right thing. And I know that is not a popular glitzy way to describe Christianity. If I were trying to sell something to you, I would never sell that to you. I would try to sell you happiness. I would stand up here and say, if you do these things, you will be happy. That's what will happen. But unfortunately, it's not true, and the pursuit of happiness does not work. But there's something better. And that's the thing that I want to try to explain in this passage. It's here in this passage, and I'm not sure if I can pull it off. But I want to talk about the pursuit of happiness and how it's a failed project. And this is important because I think it is one of the defining American cultural idols. I mean, it's just steeped into our culture. Everything, every moment of every day screams at you all day long that happiness is like the supreme good for your life. And it's so in us that, like, I almost accidentally say to my kids sometimes, like, whatever makes you happy, I just want you to be happy. And we say these things to ourselves all the time. It is ensconced in the Declaration of Independence that one of the God-given inalienable rights of all human beings everywhere is the right to the pursuit of happiness. But I don't buy it. I don't buy it mostly because it does not work. It doesn't work. First off, it backfires. People that pursue happiness are some of the most miserable people you ever meet, because happiness is like a mirage that dissolves the closer you get to it. It's like gripping sand in your hands, and the harder you grip, the more of it slips out. Happiness comes and goes, and there may be some things that you can do to position yourself to be open to happiness more than other things. I think that's certainly the case. But happiness comes and goes, and it inevitably goes. Life is hard. You guys, young as you are, don't need me to tell you that. You know it. You know it in your bones. And anybody that says something different is selling something to you. Life is very hard. Fortunately, it's not hard every minute. It's not always hard. But it is hard. We will all go through hard times. We're all going to go through pain. We're all going to go through suffering. And if happiness is your ultimate goal, where does that leave you when things fall apart? Where does that leave you when there's a diagnosis? Where does that leave you when you're in pain? Where does that leave you when somebody that you desperately care about dies? Where does that leave you when somebody you care about gets really sick? Where does that leave you when you just feel lonely? Or when you feel sad, as we all inevitably do? And so, happiness is a great thing. I love happiness. I never want to be cynical or jaded about happiness. When happiness comes, man, you take it. Take it and enjoy it. Rejoice with those who rejoice. But it is not a goal that justifies the hardships of living. It's not a goal big enough to get you out of bed in the morning when you don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning. It's not a goal big enough to get you to put one foot in front of the other when you don't feel like putting one foot in front of the other. But there is something bigger and better that is. But so happiness, it doesn't work. It backfires. It's not big enough to justify a life. But there is something better, and one of the things that is a little bit better appears in this next passage, in this next part of this passage. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. So there's a couple things going on in there. The first thing is that Elijah was not alone. Now, God sent an angel to convince him that he was not alone. Elijah was really trying to be alone. He left his servants behind and he went off by himself into the wilderness, and God sent an angel. And God will occasionally do dramatic things like that to make sure that you know that you're not alone. He does occasionally do that. It's not his normal mode of operation, though. God is the supreme gentleman. He does not like to force himself into people's lives. He stands at the door and knocks. He'll plead with you. He'll try to persuade you, but typically, he doesn't grab you by the throat and make you pay attention to him. He does sometimes. But typically, he lets it be known that he's there, but then he kind of like leaves the ball in your court a little bit because he doesn't want to force himself on you. And so sometimes you have to talk to him. Sometimes you have to maybe let somebody know, talk to somebody. And because you're not alone, but you can feel like you're alone if you completely close yourself off. And if you're in a spot, a really dark place, where you're wondering whether or not life is worth living, or maybe you've been doing self-harm, or maybe it's a deeper than sadness. You know, this is something real. This is a mental state that persists day after day, no matter how things are going around you. Even though maybe things are going well around you, and you're still just in a dark place daily. And maybe even feel guilty about that. Like sometimes when you're depressed, you do that. You're like, well, I got friends, I got things are going for me. How can I feel bad about this? And then that guilt is like, that's kicking yourself while you're down. If you're in one of those spots, if you can manage it, and I've been praying that you'd be able to manage it, if you could just tell one person, if you could just tell somebody, it's like the antidote to the poison. It will not fix it, but it's like a little crack in the door of a dark room. It just lets a little beam of sunlight in. If you could just tell one person, it may be that you need to talk to a professional, mental health professional. It may be that there's biochemical stuff going on, neurological stuff going on, for which medication would be helpful. It may be that you've just got yourself into some negative patterns of thinking and that there's no way you're going to be able to find your way out of that maze on your own, and you need somebody to help shepherd you through it and talk you through it and listen to you. And that could be a youth leader or a pastor at your church or just a really good friend, or hopefully you have a mother or a father or an aunt or an uncle. But I think if you started asking God to point somebody out to you that would be safe for you to talk to, you kind of know, and you just need that little bit of courage. And if you do anything, if you could just do that, if you could just talk to somebody. And if you can't do that, if you could at least talk to God. Because that is what Elijah did. Maybe that was all he could manage. But he was very honest with God. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. I've had enough, Lord. And maybe you could just do that. Maybe you could just find a couple of minutes and just be honest with God. Don't censor yourself. Don't say this is the way a Christian is supposed to think and talk. Just tell him what you really think. He can handle it. Because God sends this angel to Elijah, and the angel does not give him a pep talk. He doesn't give him a talking to. He doesn't say, hey man, buck up, get up, let's go. He doesn't say, what's wrong with you, man? We got work to do. He says, you're right. The journey is too far for you. And he serves him. He gives him food. He helps him get up and eat. He lets him go back to sleep. He makes him food a second time. He says, you're right. The journey is too far for you. So the first thing that's going on in this text is that you are not alone. Even though you feel alone, our feelings can be deceptive. You are not alone. At the very least, God is always with us. When you come to the God of the Bible, you come to a God who is with us. In fact, that's one of his names, is God with us. When you look at the God of the Bible, you see Jesus Christ suffering on the cross, his face contorted with anguish, bleeding to death. He is not the serene, smiling Buddha in repose, distant and undisturbed by the suffering of the world. Nah. He's a flesh and blood man who banged his thumb with hammers and skinned his knees when he was a little boy and sweat and bled and grew up and shook his disciples' hands and hugged them and kissed his mother and had nails pounded into his hands and hung on the cross. That's the God of the Bible right there. This is the God who is with you. Years ago, my childhood best friend died unexpectedly in a really tragic diving accident. He was a merchant marine and a master diver, and he was getting certification in this new piece of equipment called a rebreather that would recycle your exhaled oxygen and pull the air out of it so you could stay under longer. And he was in the Gulf of Thailand, and it was really rough seas, and he was lost at sea. They never recovered his body. It was horrible. And his parents asked me to do the funeral. Well, it wasn't a funeral because we didn't have a body. It was a memorial service. They asked me to do the memorial service. And I was, honored to be asked, but I was also devastated for my friend. I didn't know what to say. This is an intense thing. So I went to my mentor and pastor, Dick Alexander, who's this old, wizened guy. And I asked him, what should I say? And he looked down for like several long moments. And then he looked up and he looked me in the eye and he said, you go tell them that God also knows what it feels like to lose a son. Because he does. You're not alone. And you might be surprised. If you've had the courage to say something in your small group, I think you might be surprised that you're not the only one. I think you might be surprised that there's people that care about you. I think you might find out that you're not alone. And I think you might be shocked. I've prayed for a way to give you the eyes of faith to see the impact that your life has on those around you. You matter so much more than you realize. You may feel completely alone, like you hardly know anybody, but if you started naming the people that you know, and maybe you feel like you barely interact with them and you just shuffle through school with your head down, but if you started naming names, you know a bunch of students from school, you know a bunch of teachers, you know a bunch of people from church, you know neighbors on your street, you know a bunch of people, and maybe it's only 15 people, or maybe it's 50, or for most of it's more like 100 people if you started listing all the people that you know, and you may not realize that you actually have an impact on their lives, that you could. Maybe a very, very tiny one, but you could. Just a little interaction with them or just to pray for them. You could actually affect their lives. And some people, they know 300 people or 1,000 people. And so those 100 people that you know, they each know another 100 people or another 1,000 people. And each of those people, that gets us close to 1 million potentially. Each of those people knows another 1,000 people. That gets us close to 1 billion people potentially. I mean, the little tiny thing of your life, the little tiny gestures we make every day, maybe it feels like just a pebble in the ocean, but it's a pebble whose ripples go throughout the entire world. And this is getting me into the second thing going on in this passage, the thing that's better than happiness, the thing that makes life worth living. And it's something like purpose or destination or meaning. So where is Elijah going? He's on a journey. He's going somewhere. He's on his way somewhere. And that's what the angel comes to remind him. The journey is too hard for you, but you're on a journey. He's going to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And we will find out tonight that on the mountain of God, little does Elijah know now, but he'll find out soon that he is going to have a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with the presence of God, a once-in-history encounter with the presence of God. Now, I don't know what gifts God is leading you to specifically on your journey towards Mount Horeb. But Mount Horeb for you is whatever path your life takes, following Jesus one day after a time. One day at a time. One little decision at a time. And that purpose, meaning, that has the power to justify the hardships of living. It's like this. My job, what I do to make money, to pay my bills, is I teach math to fifth graders in a pretty gritty school. And it is not a fun job. It's not a happy job. Now, there are really happy moments. I mean, my students are hilarious, and I laugh a lot at school, and I try to make it fun. But my kids are going through some really heavy stuff. It's a very gritty part of the city. And so when I'm getting ready in the morning to go into work, I'm not having feelings like I have when I have a day off and I'm planning on going to the beach. It's not happy to go into work. But I have this file folder full of these little handmade cards and letters and stuff that my students over the years have made for me. And some of them have said things to me that are so sweet that I never would have dreamed that people would say things like that about me. And so what I do when I pack up my classroom at the end of the year is I put all those letters in the top of a box. That's the last box I put in the closet. So when I go back in on the first day of the school year, which is always kind of a dark day for me, I'm not ready for summer to be over, but the first box I take out of my closet and I open that lid, the first thing on top is that folder full of those letters from those students. And you want to know what? It's something better than happiness. It's like the world shimmers. Or it's like this. My wife and I did not grow up in particularly religious homes, great homes. I'm very grateful for my childhood, but we didn't read the Bible or pray before bed and stuff like that. And now, raising my own kids, we're trying to set a different course. And so we do a little prayer time before bed and read a little children's Bible and talk about God. And my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old have begun to pray. And their prayers are hilarious. They're, sometimes they pray for stuff that I'm like, okay, I'll say amen, but God's not going to bring Spider-Man by tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. Or sometimes they pray for stuff that's super poignant, that I'm like, my 5-year-old will just pray for all the homeless people in the world. And we haven't talked about homeless people a lot. We see them where we live, but we haven't talked about that a lot. He'll just pray for these really poignant things. And sometimes he'll just try to stall bedtime. And I know that's when he starts thanking God for things, I know we're in for it. God, thank you for lamps, and thank you for hair, and thank you for, because he knows he's got me, he knows I'm not going to, I do cut him off. I just cut in God, thank you for bedtime. Thank you for bedtime. It's time for bedtime. But those are moments there's something better than exhausted as I am, as tired as I am. I just want them to be quiet and go to bed so I can go to bed. But there's something meaningful happen there. I see him growing into a godly man, and I see him praying with his kids now, and them growing up and praying with their kids now, and God ushering in 1,000 years of blessing for those who love him and fear his name. And that's better than happiness. Or it's like this. I was speaking at our church a couple weeks ago, and I don't even remember what I was talking about. It's a very forgettable message. And I came up after the service. This young woman came to talk to me, and her eyes were shimmering because there were tears right underneath. And she started to cry, and she apologized for that because we always apologize for tears. I don't know why we apologize for tears. Tears are totally normal, and you've got to get it out, but we always do. And she apologized, and I said, no, this needs to come out. And she told me about some things going on in her life, and she's sobbing. And it was like time stopped. Nothing in the world mattered but what was happening right here, because God was doing something in her life. But was it a happy moment? No, she was sobbing. It wasn't a happy moment, but it was better than happiness. It had meaning. It had purpose. And it's the moments like those that'll get you out of bed in the morning when you don't feel like getting out of the bed in the morning. It's the moments like those that'll get you to put one foot in front of the other when you don't feel like you can put one foot in front of the other. Purpose, meaning. It leads to what the Bible calls joy. Joy is different from happiness. It's richer, deeper, truer. You can have joy even while you're sad. It's a very strange thing. And joy justifies the hardships of living. It was for the joy set before him that Jesus endured the cross. So there was this conversation between the Father and Son in time immemorial, however many millennia back that we can't even imagine, before time and space even existed. And they were laying out their plans for creating human beings, self-conscious beings made in the image of God, who had the potential for unspeakable horror and hell, and unimaginable blessing and joy and paradise. And they knew it was all going to go sideways. And the Father says to the Son, if we do this, I'm going to want you to go down there. And I'm going to want you to suffer for them. You won't do anything wrong. You're going to be kind of a weird kid. You're going to be that kid that's always into his Bible and the people don't understand and people misunderstand and misquote and say wrong things about. And you're going to grow up and you're going to have kind of a tough life. You're going to be a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. And when you grow up, the way it's going to end is they're all going to cheer for a murderer to be released in your place, and even your closest friends are going to run in terror, and you're going to hang alone on the cross and bleed to death. And there's even going to be a moment where you cry out and say, where are you, God? Why have you forsaken me? You're going to feel like I don't even exist for a few moments. And Jesus looked down and thought for a long moment and said, to what end would we do this? And the Father gets this big smile on his face, and he says, oh, well, that's the best part. You're going to get a whole lot of little brothers and sisters. Joy. And Jesus said, sign me up for you. If you start putting one little step in front of the other, one little step, whatever you can manage, maybe just getting out of bed an hour earlier, or drinking some water today, or doing 10 push-ups, or organizing one shelf in your room, or praying for one person. If you start taking one little step day after day, you can hardly believe what your life could look like in 6 months. And 15 years from now, you won't even recognize it. You have no idea what God can accomplish through someone that just starts a little purpose, a little tiny thing, little tiny grains of sand moving one at a time. But if you try to do it in the pursuit of happiness, you're going to get derailed because it's not going to justify the hard days. But I wonder, would you do it for him? Happiness will come and go. And in my experience, those who follow Jesus, well, I'll just speak for myself. I've gotten a lot more of it than I deserve. But regardless of how much happiness you get or how difficult things get, here's what will happen if you make meaning and purpose following Jesus every day, the point of your life. However the adventure of your life plays out, and however long it plays out, till God brings you to your end, you will say, it was worth it. That's what I want to pray for you. I pray, God, that every single person within the sound of my voice We'll follow you to the best of our ability, whatever we can do and will do. Each day, one little tiny step at a time, getting back up when we fall down and picking each other up when we fall down, until we each come to that glorious day where you wipe away every tear, say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Reunite us to our lost loved ones and open us up to the experience of your eternal, ever-expanding, rich, life-giving joy.